My name is Lou, and I am the founder and CEO of the Alchemist Kitchen.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And our mission has been to be in the medicinal space. We have the recreational space, we have the medical space, we have ceremonial space. We're really in the medicinal space, so showing people how they should approach plant medicine, from the herbal remedy to from the cannabis arc to the psychedelic arc. It's all, kind of coming together. And we've been blessed that we have tremendous, over 7-8 years, we have tremendous resources. And we know all the mycologists and the hobbits that come out of the woodwork, and friends of Martin's and so on. So let's start. Give a little background on what you're up to.
I should say, for starters, Alchemist Kitchen, beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Of course, because of COVID, restricting travel, I haven't been to the new store, which maybe is not that new at this point.
That's a year, not that new.
But one thing I really always liked about Alchemist Kitchen and love the new setup, it's many herbs. It isn't just CBD.
Yes,
it isn't just cannabis.
Right.
And part of what the impetus for Project CBD, which is an educational platform that myself and a couple of others launched back in 2010. And we were involved in introducing CBD into the medical cannabis world in California. And it spread from there. It's nothing to do with hemp. This is medical marijuana that we were focusing on. And it's partly the spirit of Alchemist Kitchen. We felt, if anything, the focus on high THC cannabis, which is really all there was in California. And that's a lot. I'm not putting that down. I love it. I use it every day. But once we learned about CBD as a journalist attending science conferences and writing about them, where very few journalists were there, one of two maybe, kind of a world opened up. I learned about this other component of cannabis that wasn't intoxicating like THC. It was something called cannabidiol. I'd never heard about it. But what I was hearing about at these science conferences was jaw-dropping. It was amazing. And I went away from these conferences feeling, and you were talking about in the 2010, before 2010 now, and early on, where CBD was only being discussed among scientists for the most part. It really wasn't outside of it. I thought, God, if we could ever have CBD stuff as part of our experience in California, that could really be something.
What year is this? What would you say?
Well, this is before we actually came upon the CBD in Britain. So 2005, 6, 7.
2005. So, like 15, 16, 17 years now.
And just simply, we weren't using CBD, we couldn't get it.
Right.
But we heard about it. And what we heard was sufficient to make us feel very strongly that if somehow this could become part of the medical cannabis experience in California, which was our domain, it could be very, very significant. If it did anything like to a human being or to a human's brain, like it did to the brain of rats, mice that we were hearing about at science conferences, we thought, wow, this is going to be really something.
That's great.
And that's what sort of started with the CBD project. Because it wasn't just about thinking about this stuff and wishing we had it. We came upon plants that were what we call CBD-rich. And in those days, 2009, 2010, they weren't like the hemp varieties. This is all cannabis. And generally speaking, they had a significant amount of both CBD and THC. It wasn't like high CBD and very little THC. These were not hemp plants. This was how CBD entered the culture again. It was through cannabis, not through hemp. I know hemp is part of it's a version of cannabis, but in that way. And we felt that this could be very significant, not only in terms of the potential to help an individual who's suffering from any number of diseases that we heard discussed at these science conferences, but we had a broader vision, you might say. I don't want to say broader, because that's huge. If you can help a person, that's quite enough, frankly. But we felt that CBD could have a huge impact on the drug war, that we felt it could be the key to liberating cannabis from the drug abuse paradigm. It could be really something that could take us to a whole different level in terms of how the government was relating to this, that we wondered how will they deal with the fact that now there are plants that aren't getting you high or not getting you very high. Why will they make this legal? How can they justify it? And they can no longer say, well, medical marijuana is just a front for stoners. That's sort of a long-winded way. And we introduced it. And,
at the time, medical marijuana stuff, that was really San Francisco was the birthplace, right? Northern California. I'm just curious, just as a footnote, is was the treatment of the gay community that were struggling with AIDS a contributing factor
factor.
Was an important
huge factor.
I don't think people realize it's just 30 seconds on that birthing because it was a healing catalyst, right?
It was the major catalyst for what became the legal medical marijuana in California. The AIDS crisis, no question about it.
Yeah,
because
really
people are wasting away. Well, what gives you the munchies helps you eat, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of reasons why that was a really amazing herbal fit for that terrible disease.
Yes.
That's before 1996.
Yes.
It was very, very important.
Yes.
No doubt.
And so a little bit more on Project CBD in terms of the platform and the editorial ethos and
well, my background is as a journalist. I've written a number of books, and I was in Northern California interested in the medical marijuana phenomenon, medical cannabis. I have no problem with the word marijuana, by the way, as you may have noticed. I think it's an okay word. I understand some people are very sensitive about it in terms of racism, and I respect that a lot, but I think it's we got to go way beyond not using that word if we want to really deal with racism and cannabis as in terms of historically. So it started as an educational platform, nonprofit. We started writing about what we were hearing the scientists say. Because the doctors didn't know about the doctors writing that was a recommendation, not a prescription. But basically educating the medical cannabis community about CBD, the fact that there was something more than just the THC part that could be very significant for therapeutic value. But we also knew that when people, our hunch was when people heard that you could use cannabis medicinally without getting high or without getting very high or maybe less high, or that you can modulate the high that way, that would bring a lot more people into the scene. Because people are, there's a lot of propaganda, people hesitate about it, and not everybody enjoys cannabis or the cannabis high, let's face it. So we felt that this was going to have a huge social impact. That the conversations early on with a handful of people that were interested in this back 2010 during this period, I remember specifically talking about how introducing this into the community was going to be like an acupuncture needle going into the body politic, turning the needle, letting the energy loose, and we're going to see what happens. And we see what happened. A little bit beyond what I expected.
So, take it up to 2022. Now, New York is legalized cannabis after quite a lengthy time. Well, one of the good aspects of the New York State recreational has been a much greater awareness to the social justice issues, social equity issues, and we're in the process of applying for we actually were invited to apply for a cannabis license, and one of the reasons why was that the state appreciated that there was a location already selling CBD, but in a more mindful way, in an educational way, with a little more emphasis on the medicinal benefits. And we were very early, we were very early in the partnership extractions and so on. And then CBD got very prolific, had a moment, the queen bee. And I think the consumers got very confused right up through COVID. CBD is not always just one cannabinoid. It's not, CBD is not always created equal. It was really a counterpunch to THC, right? So it was an ability to market and ship. These growers, there were not as many dispensaries as they thought, and so the industry pivoted to making CBD, which they can then try to distribute over the last couple of prolifically, and cannabis industry also, I think, is going through its changes in the other states, right? Maybe too much, not enough supply, too much.
Different in every state. It's very chaotic.
But what is interesting, because it helps us transition into the discussion around psychedelics, is that we're looking at THC as an ingredient, not weed. It's an ingredient. How can you use that ingredient to infuse and use with the other cannabinoids to make great medicinal products for different use states? Is really, I think, will be a little bit of the next generation. I hope, where it's more mindful to the use and the intention, moderation, even if there's THC in the formula. Will you feel that way too? I mean, as a trend. Well,
we always felt that it was never a CBD versus THC for us. It was CBD and THC. We call them the power couple. They work best together.
Yeah.
But the gift of CBD was allowing someone to manage the high.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the first challenge of medical cannabis. Can the person handle the high?
Yes.
You might think, oh, if you like it, then why is that a big deal? Well, not everybody can.
Yeah.
And everybody, frankly, will hit a guardrail with too much THC.
Yes.
That's not going to kill you, but you will bump up against something that might not be the most pleasant.
Yes.
So how do you manage that? Well, CBD is a really important in that aspect.
Yes.
And the challenge for the cannabis industry thus far, another part of it is, well, how do you? It's not just a matter of managing the high. How do you market this without being able to say what it's good for? Because you can't make medical claims unless it goes through the whole pharmaceutical thing. And this, early on, we sensed this was a way to avoid that whole mess of medical claims, because it was never about, well, what ratio is the best for a specific condition? It's what ratio is comfortable for that person.
Yes.
Yeah. Because frankly, cannabinoids are so prolific in terms of the potential applications.
Yes.
In terms of, and we know this going back in history. Back to the dispensatory, the dispensary was called, not dispensaries. It was pharmacopoeia.
The
from the 1800s, middle 1800s.
And even uses. Further back, our indigenous roots, right?
Chinese, many uses. So, just to pivot a little bit, why would we even be considering talking about psychedelics in this context? Because this is part of where this is going to go.
Yes.
And I appreciate that Alchemist Kitchen is sort of on the cutting edge in a way in terms of the interface with the public in that, both in education and perhaps otherwise. And there is actually a connection there. But
help us with that connection.
Well, you wouldn't think, because CBD is about as unpsychedelic as you can get. It doesn't make you trip, and psychedelics, if you use enough, it's going to, a very different kind of experience.
Yeah.
I wouldn't exactly say they're polar opposite. It turns out that CBD and the serotonergic psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, bind to the same receptor. The same serotonin receptor. It's called 5-HT2A. It's the two-way serotonin receptor, and they both bind to it. And when I learned that, I thought, oh, great! Now we can talk about psychedelics as part of our work at Project CBD. I don't want to be pigeonholed. CBD. We're about cannabis. We're about healing.
Yes.
It turns out that the endocannabinoid system, as far as I can tell from the research we've been doing, is really, really crucial in terms of both mediating some of the key health benefits of psychedelics, but also I think it's very helpful for illuminating some of the current issues and challenges that are emerging now within the psychedelic space. That if you bring an understanding of the endocannabinoid system into that discussion, it really can illuminate things in a way to bring clarity to a discussion that's all over the place. Right? So that's it's a great interest of mine. Long before I got into doing all this, I had written the
Well, I think that's a convergence. I mean, we were here at the Alchemist kitchen. We were early making really fine premium CBD, and then, psychotherapists got to know us. And some of those psychotherapists came and said, "Hey, Lou, you got to help me out. We have these patients that are seriously ill with depression, and these antidepressants, and I'm really stuck. Could you try and get some psilocybin for these people? Just, it's self-directed. I can't be involved. Just try to get them very good quality, safe and trusted." So 2 years later, the referrals have just continued to accelerate from the doctors, and has been quite interesting, but relationship between not just the endocannabinoid, but the relationship of trust. Well, if you don't have trust in where you get your medicine, then you're not doing yourself, we need trusted connection we all need to protect each other as we go through the decriminalization, legalization, but at the same time, there's a lot of suffering happening at the clinical level, and so you see that. But now you're seeing, I think, more how we see psychedelics really becoming truly therapeutic in the medicinal, microdosing, very medicinally focused, outside of the recreational, because I think most people, when you say have their first experience with psychedelics, somebody got a party, they got some mushrooms, you try it, and right? I mean, it's pretty recreational.
It's certainly outside of the kind of a typical medical framework.
Yes.
It's not how, sometimes I share a story of going to these psychedelic conferences, and occasionally, I don't go all of them or anything, but you have hundreds of people and thousands of people in an auditorium, and they're listening to a panel, and they're going through all the latest developments on the potential medical uses of psychedelics, and they're emphasizing the importance of how, in terms of just getting this past the stigma and into the mainstream, important to emphasize the medical. And then the panel's over, everybody runs out, everybody's swapping this thing. And I can say probably of those 1,000 people there, none of them have been turned on to psychedelics in the context they're recommending for people. It's always been on the outside of just using it.
Yes.
And sometimes it's with the intent of healing specifically, or sometimes it's just going into with an open mind and experiencing what you experience.
Yes.
Which I think is, to me, we should never lose sight of the importance of that. And
No
I
question.
respect the importance of the medical.
No question. I think that's another thing of trying to normalize the conversation. Here we are, we probably all could become friends for life because we're sharing an ethos, but we're on the storefront, we're on the street. I'm a native New Yorker, so I have a lot of merchant last generation. It's an endangered generation of people who really love retailing and, communicating with the customer. And I come from that kind of lineage. So to be able to sit with Martin Lee and some friends and talk about these trends in Soho on the street is really nice, and having the classes we're doing quite a few classes in the area. So then give us some insights to how you see the landscape now going forward. I mean, in terms of what's going on in Oregon and California in terms of decriminalization and legalization, and will you like to hear a little bit?
Are you speaking of psychedelics more, cannabinoids?
I think we should stay with the psychedelic because I think that's where the interest generally is right now, this transition. For example, there's a migration of the really great growers, the ones who were in Humboldt, early, really growing beautiful marijuana, really special, have migrated. Their sons and daughters, they've migrated to Oregon, and they're doing mushrooms now. So they're the lineage of the farmers. It's a whole amazing thing that's happening, migrating north to Oregon, settling in and around Medford, producing medicinal mushrooms, getting ready for legalization, where they can provide therapeutic psychedelic. This is all happening at the farm level. I'm blessed, because I get to understand that migration. But the talent, and then all this talent, young botanical scientists influenced by like a Merlin Sheldrake. I don't know if you know his book Entangled Life. We're seeing a lot of younger people coming out of college studying botanical science with the intent of getting into being producers and makers and crafts, so like it's quite amazing. So how do you relate to that trend?
I think what you describe is sort of a layer of the psychedelic renaissance.
Yes.
But it's to me, in some ways, it's surprising that this is all even happening. We've got to this point. I mean, I was doing this back in the late 60s. It's a very, very different time. And it wasn't microdosing.
Right.
That was unheard. It's not part of the whole.
Microdosing. Right.
That was like, oh, you really? Why not? Well,
yeah, stay in the bus. Why don't you just stay in the bus?
So, I look at this both kind of as an observer and partly as a participant, and try to find ways that maybe I can contribute to the discussion.
Yes.
But I also look at I look at it somewhat critically as well. And there's a lot of layers to it. Very interested in the science. There's a lot of startups now focusing on what they call psychedelic research, develop psychedelic. But most of it doesn't have anything to do with psychedelics. I call them pseudodelics.
Oh,
the phrase from David Luke in
interesting.
The pseudodelics.
So we need to be careful then.
Well, what it is, it's perfectly legitimate research. They take a psychedelic compound, it's a scaffold, you would say in the research language, and you tweak it. But you start from the premises, well, if you can get rid of the trip, but keep the therapy, well, then you've got a $1 billion product.
Oh, I see. I see.
And it's very much driven by venture capital, and all that. I mean, medicine and money, it isn't the great. I mean, medicine should be for medicine. It should, people should have access. It shouldn't be messed with money, And already that's what's starting very heavily in terms of the psychedelic research. So what's called psychedelic research, as far as I can tell, is mainly not having anything to do with the trip. It's all about avoiding the trip.
Yeah.
But I think there is potentially great
because of the mental health mission, right? That it's
money. You can pay.
No, but the capitalistic drive is to get regulatory and have something, some intellectual property that can live properly within the regulatory, but no one else can have it.
Well, right? I hope that maybe they can develop some really great pharmaceuticals with it. I wouldn't rule it out.
No question that's because it's a big world. You need a lot of medicine around the world. I think the thing is here in America, though, the difference between the term decriminalization and legalization. So decriminalization to me means more what you're saying, create trust, have some rules, but let people learn about this in a natural way, in an organic way, with not as maybe prescribed by a therapist, maybe or maybe not, right? And just let it find itself, because there's such little downside,
I mean, these are very, very powerful compounds we're talking about, and it could be problems. As a person can have a bad experience.
So then the regulatory side, is it?
I think education's key for that.
Okay.
Because people should learn how to use these things and use them with respect, and realize if it's using it the first time, just don't go abuse it yourself and walk over a bridge. I would just do it. There's obviously sensible things that just require education.
Yeah.
But this is a very, very important layer of the whole thing. To me, in some ways, the most important. But it's different from what we're talking about, scientific research into psychedelics. And part of the research is on what we call psychedelics, but there is a very, very strong emphasis, not entirely dissimilar from how CBD began to be talked about. Well, you can do it without getting high. And sure, if that's what you need, great. But for us, it was never introduced that way into the culture.
I see.
It was never about not getting high. It was about managing the high.
I see.
For some people, that might mean not getting high. For others, it might mean
exactly. Yes.
But with psychedelics, you had a phrase, people were depressed and it wasn't working for the standard things. Typically, the pharmaceutical antidepressants work by stimulating what we call neurogenesis in the brain, stimulating the creation of new brain cells in a certain area of the brain, the hippocampus, and neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. This has become a buzzword now in the psychedelic discussion.
But go back to antidepressants, they stimulate
neurogenesis, the creation of new brain cells, which is happening throughout our adult life, even and actually more when we're in the womb, and more when we're born. Then compared to as we become adults, the neurogenesis slows down, and depression is associated with either a lack of or a very depleted neurogenesis. This is very clear that this is not a controversial association.
Right.
And with pharmaceutical companies have developed various antidepressant drugs, sometimes
that stimulate the acceleration of those cells.
Yeah. But like you said, it doesn't work all the time.
Yes.
Now, coming back to the pseudodelics, working with, it's all about developing antidepressants, anti-inflammatory, whatever it might be, that work, but don't have the trip.
Gotcha. They will be less addictive or less.
Well, but what I'm suggesting is going to be real limitations here, because then what's the difference between that and a standard antidepressant?
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, that's what CBD is.
Yeah.
CBD doesn't get you high.
Exactly.
CBD has this neurogenic effect. It induces the creation of new brain cells.
Yeah.
That's not a controversial statement in science. There's dozens of papers, peer-reviewed papers that show that it does this for mice.
That.
And it shows that it does this for all animals with the backbone, and for people too. Probably we don't. That's where it gets a little tricky when you test that thing. But I think in this case, it's pretty safe to say that it does that for humans too. So does THC.
Yeah.
So does psychedelics.
Yes.
It induces neurogenesis.
Yes.
The argument that's made by the pseudodelic, and I don't mean that as a put down. I do respect the research that goes into this, and I hope it comes to something. But I think what mainly it's about is psychedelics give us the money.
Yes,
you go off.
There's no question. I mean, I can totally attest to that, because I think, the euphoria of psychedelic research and couched in a pandemic that was really a big pandemic disguised by the pandemic of COVID. The pandemic of mental illness is
very much so.
Profound, so I think as people are coming back into a post, we're going to cope with viruses, so antiviral, which is also can be deeply fueled to the positive with cannabinoids, right?
There's something going on there.
There's a lot going on with antiviral, because if you go travel, you certainly don't want to get tested if you have the virus. You just want to get rid of the virus, right? Most people. So a lot of things happening that are coming out of that. But the psychedelic research, I do think, has been very much fueled by a venture, a lot of loose money, and kind of the same thing that happened in the cannabis industry.
In some ways, a little more acutely so.
More acutely,
But the argument that's made by a lot of these researchers is that they're getting money to look for, the compound that's going to be the magic bullet that won't make you trip, that will take away your depression.
Yes.
And I think it's not that it's a fool's errand or something like that. I think they're going to run into the same problems as the standard psychedelic, not the standard antidepressants, is that they're going to have, it's going to be limited.
Yes.
If it induces neurogenesis, it will have somewhat of an antidepressant effect. But we know from the standard antidepressant effects, 30% aren't helped.
Yes.
So there must be something more there.
Well, I think that's probably why you speak to education, because it's the spirit of decentralization. Decriminalization at its heart, at least people I follow, is decentralization. Don't let anybody control it. Make great product, educate people, let people make up their mind how they want to use it. Like the mycelium. Yeah, decentralized. Crypto, if you're into crypto, it's all decentralized. And so there is some correlations between that. On how can we potentially educate ourselves as leaders, since we're users, right? And how do we put enough rule and boundaries in place to protect people in a safe way, so that they're able to explore it safely. So here, like having talks with you, we're starting to have weekly meetups. The people come, 20 people come, and they never have done psychedelics. somehow, maybe, oh, back in school, you know, went to a Grateful Dead concert. It was great, but but they were very interested now. So we just I mean, we're educating, we're trying to give people a good entryway into, how to talk about it. What's the difference between medicinal and ceremonial? There's a lot of stuff going on in ceremonial, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ayahuasca, San Pedro, and how people can do that deeper work. That's a lane. You need a teacher. You need the right access. And so we're trying to educate people to that.
I think, as I mentioned earlier about the endocannabinoids, how does that fit into all this?
Yeah.
It kind of brings together the discussion about antidepressants.
Yeah.
The endocannabinoid system, for lack of a better term, mediates, regulates the process of neurogenesis. Mm-hmm. So anytime you're taking a drug, whether it's psilocybin or CBD or a standard antidepressant, the endocannabinoid system is involved in conferring and conveying the antidepressant effects. You see, so that and again, that's not controversial science.
No,
that's very well established. But when again, the argument about from the pseudodelic types,
yes,
we don't need the trip.
Yeah,
I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Again, I'd love to see that kind of research develop into effective remedies for people.
Yeah.
But I think a full-on trip brings something else into the therapeutic realm that you don't get just from CBD or just from an antidepressant or just from a pseudodelic if they ever really develop it.
Yes,
they're plenty.
Because really the deeper, right? Isn't the deeper trip is the courage to lose your ego a bit and move into a change of state for better awareness, so you can spend some time integrating that subsequently. It's
challenging to people, of course. But,
yeah, definitely, it's very challenging.
Well,
so's depression.
When you think about tripping, you can have a lot of experiences there. People can have terrible experiences, blissful experience, everything in between, fun experiences, serious experience. There's a whole range of experiences. And that's not because of the part that's making your brain cells grow, because that's the wide range of experiences are attributable to the fact that psychedelics are context dependent. They're dependent on the context you take them in. If you're a CIA agent taking LSD or giving LSD to somebody without them knowing, that's not going to be the same as two great friends walking in the forest together on a beautiful day.
Yeah.
It's a very different kind of experience. You're taking the same drug, the same compound. You're hitting the same receptor. So why is it so different? What is the psychedelic trip bring to it that the pseudodelic experience doesn't bring? Well, what makes it different is the set and setting, right? That there's input from the context, which is outside the brain, what's going on in the brain. And there again, the endocannabinoid system is absolutely key because it mediates not only where the mind and the body meet, or where the microbiome and the host meet. It's so crucial. It mediates where I love the phrase, the wild flowering mind meets the flesh of the world, where epigenetic inputs come in.
Wow.
And does that. And it's in the literature. There's not a lot. We're actually focusing on that.
Well, the context there for the endocannabinoid system mediates whether I decide to, I'm going to go for a hike and I trip, or I'm going to be on the beach, or I just want to be in my bed under my headphones. That's context, right?
Yeah, context. But context is also, set and setting are very closely related.
Yeah.
A life's worth of micro aggressions in a racist context, if that's what a person's carrying in their psyche, why does that injure someone?
Yeah.
What is the actual biochemical? How does it go from a racist insult into on and on into a negative health experience?
Yes.
It's clearly, and that not just it could be any kind of epigenetic input. That's where the endocannabinoids.
Epigenetic. What's the definition of that? I'm just
outside the genes.
Outside the genes. Yeah. Okay.
Pollution would be epigenetic.
Yes.
Our education.
Epigenetic.
It's and now we're talking about the setting.
Yeah, but now we get into some cool stuff. I mean, if you picking this up a little bit? Because this is awesome.
This is sort of kind of latest thinking that we're playing with at Project CBD, because this is another aspect of
impressive.
I mean, to me, I would be frustrated just focusing on healing as if it was just an individual thing. And while that's very important, you're talking about individuals getting better. I never want to separate it from the social context, from the overall context, because you trip, you got to come back to this world where all that stuff's happening. And,
definitely.
And hopefully a full-on trip, which I think is very valuable therapy potentially, can help one deal with that stuff, adapt to those stressors and pressures and epigenetic inputs, which could be positive and negative.
Definitely.
That you can learn a lot of how to deal with that. That's what's so profound. And that's what you're not going to get from an experience that doesn't involve the whole thing, because you're
maybe I wonder, because another big thing is hey, it's all fine if you have the money to your privilege. Go to a therapist for the most part is a privilege. It's not an inexpensive investment. People do it to get healthy, but on an ongoing basis. So I'm curious how you would imagine a new class of service providers. In other words, a new class. So we're birthing a new class. Maybe the roots. This is how I'm feeling is the roots of the holistic practitioner, particularly in the United States. You go for a massage. You want deep tissue. It's a little bit of shiatsu. It's a hybrid. It's a mashup. A little Swedish body workers in America practice.
I'm ready if you want.
Yeah, me too. But I'm curious. I'm feeling like there is the beginning of a new class of service providers. They're coming from nurses. They're coming from true holistic practitioners, and we need coaching and caretaking when we go through this whole arc of personal growth, right? And I wonder if in the end that could manifest, because you do want somebody to talk to when you go on a trip, or you need a sitter, or you would like this experience to be more confidential than perhaps traditional psychedelic experience are usually done in a group or with friends. How do you respond to that as a concept?
I think that's really the interesting playing field, if I could use that phrase, to see what's going to emerge. Because we're not necessarily talking about a doctor or a nurse or even a medical professional. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong. They could have that as a background.
It could be it's not a therapeutic arrangement in a traditional sense.
Right.
When we look back to the 1950s, the first wave of interest in psychedelics, both research and therapeutic use. One of the things that's quite striking when they do this sort of roundup, looking back, all the different studies, and there were many scientific studies published about using LSD therapeutic, or LSD was the main thing. And it's a pity that it's been sort of shunted to the margins now in favor of psilocybin. Nothing against psilocybin.
Well, I don't know. We have an LSD tincture that's just amazing, but for certain purposes. See, that seem like they have different purposes a little bit.
People microdose LSD too, but such a minute dose to begin with. Even the big doses. It's true. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out on a social level. And keep in mind, people have been using these plants and mushrooms since time immemorial, since before the written word. And somehow we managed to survive as a species pretty good. It's not like that was the death knell. I think it might be in that death knell.
Well, very interesting. How about a question you want to have thoughts, something you want to exchange? Anything that you'd like Martin or us to talk about?
Delicious drink, by the way.
What brought you here today?
So it's interesting because the topic just brought up of working in that field. So it's basically something that I'm going through right now, where I was interested in perhaps learning to become a sitter or perhaps become an integration coach. And the direction that I decided to take was to become a social worker, and then as a psychotherapist, work with integration and that kind of thing. And so now
You're in that process now?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm starting with the MSW program now, and I'm kind of trying to do a bit of the work the school hasn't done yet. You know, the Johns Hopkins, Berkeley, Stanford are all ahead of the game, and then over here,
Mhm.
some of the schools are a little behind. So I'm trying to figure out, for instance, for a field placement, where like what institutions to approach, where I might get some experience in psychedelics. Because I don't think the school will find those for me.
So that's really great. Thank you so much. What's your name again?
Marissa.
Marissa. That's so great, Marissa. The whole academic relationship of people wanting to study, needing credential. They want to feel they can get credential. How do you see that?
Well, you know, again, many layers to this whole renaissance, so-called, and in some ways, it's very mundane. You're in the real world. Forget about psychedelics. You know, somebody's going through something. You have an open heart. You don't just say, "Oh, please, I don't want to hear about your problems." You don't do that. You're accommodating. You know, if you can do that well, you're fine as a sitter. Important to learn some of the do's and don'ts, but that's easy. You know, if you've got that kind of sensibility, that heart, you know, it's going to work out fine in that context. Quite frankly, it's not. You know, it is very otherworldly, yet very not otherworldly. You're still in the real world. With psychedelics, it's not like you blank out and you're hallucinating in a completely different space, and you don't know that you're in a room with a pole or talking. You know, there are drugs like that. You know, that you will see things that aren't there and not see things that are there. You know, that's not how psychedelics generally are.
There definitely is another. There definitely, having worked with herbalists and mycologists and so on, you know, people still don't know what they're supposed to do with an herbalist. What do you do with that person? Do they have a license?
You should ask Bridget. She's an herbalist.
Yeah, no, but they're still very discriminated against when it comes up to you know, people need to be educated why they would speak to an herbalist, you know. Well, this piece is very much of coming from places of compassion. The nurses, the really good nurses who are just finished with that structure, they're moving a lot into the progressive ones. I notice a lot of interest in that shift from caretaking, you know, the nanny, the caretaker, you know, moving. But I do think that you need educational currency. You know, you need some currency in terms of qualification.
I also think one will be a much better sitter, so to speak, if it's kind of an odd term, but if one has had the experience full blown at least once, because one should know, you know, you know, this is it's of this world, but it's not of this world. It's a kind of interesting dialectic of A and not A together, you know, the opposites there. And
well, that's easy. I mean, that's part of the path of becoming that. You know?
It's interesting because the education aspect is kind of a double-edged sword, because once you become licensed, I've noticed that there's a distancing from actually doing the work as a sitter, and then it's just integration work for afterwards, where you're not allowed to actually send someone to go get psychedelic or sit with them, but you can do the integration work later. And so that's the realm that I'm exploring right now.
That's interesting.
The word sitter is interesting because it implies you're not moving much. And that's not necessarily, and that has that, again, in the terms of the medical context of one going for sort of a formal, you know, going into the experience, they've got issues, they're trying to deal with their depression, their trauma, their substance abuse. Those are the big three for
definitely. And there's a certain amount of choreography. People like to surrender into, I'm feeling this. Okay, maybe you should play some music. I'm doing this, you know.
Well, walk in the woods.
A walk in the woods, you know, but you are kind of building trust. There's a little surrendering into keep putting me in a context that would allow me to connect with this medicine, you know.
Maybe it's not an academic training. Maybe it's more of like a shamanistic training, because it's more of the invisible world, you know, that supports the journey you have to go through, because you are fit to a shaman journey, they take you down to the underground and then they take you back. So I think that's something that maybe, in conjunction
Hmm.
to the session.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think? What's your thoughts today?
Piggybacking on what you're saying too, I think it's really like where we're headed, or where I'd like to be bringing the conversation is helping people to become their best self-care clinician. You know, and I think that, I think it's sitting, if it's
Yeah.
somebody who has experience, obviously, and I like, Jenny Sansucci, who you introduced me to, and I know she worked with you.
She's worked very closely with we love her. She's the Rebels Apothecary, right? Yeah.
I just heard her story about how she got accepted to she applied previously.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of academic and book knowledge, but you need the personal experience. You need to go try these things,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she did.
Yeah.
And she came back and she told her experience, and now she's welcome.
Yes.
It is a really important part of it. Even with a cigarette, the goal is you're there to be supported. You're not there to get in the way. You're not there to have your ego be in there. You're there to be just as open, or try to be as open to that person, because it's about them.
Yeah.
It's about their discovery.
Yeah.
And you're there to be reassuring.
Yeah.
Where some of the guardrails may be whatever.
Well, yeah, we're sitting here, the Alchemist kitchen. We're trying to be a good sitter in the sense of, if you come here, let's talk, let's connect. Hey, we're all in it together, the meaning, if you're going to use something psychedelic or something, intoxicating from cannabis, let's share it. What's the experience like? Share it, knowledge transfer. Oh man, we're already seeing certain trends. We have a lot of mothers. They're 40, 50, maybe 50 plus, 40 plus. The son or daughter's 20, getting out of college. They don't want mommy anymore, but they still need the mommy, but so how can they, let me take some psychedelic microdose. They take the microdose and the next day they realize they want to give that they want to share that with the child, because they already remember they had an experience back in college, doing some psychedelic, something psychedelic in a recreational way. But now they want to bring something medicinal to their children. All kind of little trends we're seeing, But as an herbalist, herbalists tend to have a point of view around cannabis and psychoactive substances. Well, what is your point of view in terms of its relationship to the core of herbal remedies, the adaptogenics, and the elders? In American herbalism, the elders are still alive that have been very formidable influences. They're still of this generation, right? So, what will you comment on that?
Well, I would say that herbalists have also been victims of prohibition. A lot of them have stayed away from that out of fear too. So there's a lot of herbalists that just won't talk about it because they don't have experience with it either.
Yeah.
But those that do have experience and are willing to talk about it, I think it's, you put it in the realm of the master plants. The master plants are the plants that affect consciousness.
Oh.
The way that psychedelics and, obviously other plants affect. They're psychoactive. The word CBD not being psychoactive.
Yeah.
So it's working and everyone's just not that euphoria.
Yeah.
So, they are a class of master plants and they're to be used with respect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a big idea that, there might, there's other plants that we can be using.
Yes.
And all of the resources that we're giving to cannabis right
Yes.
now. A lot of resources, not just with energy, land,
Yes.
human resources.
Yes. Yes.
We could be putting those resources to other plants and taking care of the planet better.
That's a really interesting point of view. I haven't heard recently that articulation of let's be careful what we wish for, right? When we need to cultivate all of awareness to all of the master plants. Yeah, which we try to do here, but that's very meaningful, Oh, that lane, yeah. And you have legalization in Vermont, right? So you must have a lot of stuff going up in Vermont, right? You have
Medical for about 10 years.
oh, nothing recreational yet.
And just they decriminalized and then legalized possession
Yeah. Okay.
and share basically, but not sales.
I see.
Sales started this year.
And this year, yeah. Interesting.
Bridget has been very involved in the medical cannabis experience in Vermont since day
Yeah,
day
no,
one.
no,
Yeah.
well, that's great.
And
Any-
from a herbalist standpoint as well, even from a cannabis standpoint, the full spectrum idea of full spectrum is the respect towards the plants. When you were talking about isolating, that's really taking it a step further from the actual source to the connection to spirit,
Mhm.
May not necessarily be the path of full experience.
Mhm.
Because if you take the high away, as we were saying
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
Then maybe that's also a pathway for transformation.
Could be. Mhm. The isolate issue is very much a key factor in the whole cannabis industry, and particularly CBD industry. A lot of it is isolate, or working with an isolate to be part of maybe a broader spectrum product. But to me, an isolate is just another part of the plant that we should respect it. The problem with the isolate is not that it's not as effective as full spectrum products. That's the reality. Full spectrum tends to be more effective, but that the isolates tend to be privileged in our regulatory apparatus from pharmaceutical perspective. Isolate. Look, we have cannabis has hundreds of cannabinoids, and some of these occur in very, very minute amounts, which may have tremendous medical potential. Scientists work with it, and they shine a light on some of what that potential might be. And I would never suggest that we shouldn't deal with these compounds as isolates, if that's the only way to deal with it. Extract them or reproduce. It's just that we should never privilege them above the plant as a whole, and that's what's happening. That isolates, because they're more convenient for scientists to work for, precise. When you talk about cannabinoids, people think, oh, it's prohibition really kept scientists from working with it, and that's true. But scientists don't like to work with substances that have
change.
80 different impacts. They want to work with something that affects one thing. It's so all over the place that it's really challenging for. So drug developers just shy away.
Yeah, and also, in edibles or beverages, they want the consistency.
Mhm.
And so, you have something to share.
I do. I have so many questions, but I'll limit it to just one right now. Just to piggyback what you're talking about with isolates right now, I wanted to ask Martin, what is your feelings about THCO right now?
Mm.
Like acetate, for example, like THC acetate, and like D8, for another example, Delta 8, and all these other different things that are coming out that are kind of trying to mock THC in a manner in order for users to get even more elevated. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, the THCO, unlike the other Delta 8, Delta 10, or whatever, all these other things, that actually has been around for a while. And the U.S. military was working with that. I remember the experiment giving it to dogs, and the dogs kept hiding under the table, and they wouldn't respond if you stepped on their paws. I remember, really, that must be really high for a dog. So it's been around for a while. But these other things, it's not that I'm not super enthusiastic about things that don't occur in nature. Why? Cannabis there's a lot there. I don't think you need a whole lot more, frankly, in terms of the compounds in it. My problem with like a Delta 8 or a Delta 10, a Delta 8 actually does exist in the real world in minute quantities. Delta 10, I don't think does actually. I think it's a byproduct of a synthetic process. The problem is that Delta 8 per se, it's the crap that's present in the products when it's converted from a CBD isolate into Delta 8. It's not a clean conversion, generally speaking. And the folks that are doing that are not the ones that, generally speaking, the most conscientious about making sure it's a clean product. These things aren't tested really. So it's not so much Delta 8 as an issue to me as the Delta 8 product, which is something.
It's kind of a
Yeah. Why would you?
it's kind of a pretend.
Yeah.
You know, it's like play the gray area where you can't legally smoke, or play the gray area of getting high.
See to me, if you want,
Well, without okay, which because of the law. Once the laws change, I don't think it has. I don't think it. I think it's a placeholder.
I think there are two key
I mean-
factors. In states where it isn't cannabis is not legal in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
this stuff's flying off the shelves.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
And people want to get high, and it does get you high. It's not as strong a high, but if you use a lot of it, it will be just as strong a high.
For most people, it's fine.
It tends to be kind of mild, but you don't know how the other stuff's impacting you. It's just that why would you need it in a state where it's legal? It's kind of an artifact.
Well, that's what I say. It's a part of the story.
What was the military doing in the stage? Oh,
They were trying to develop a non-lethal incapacitating drug. That's why they were working with LSD, quite expensive. They wanted something that you can give to a target that wouldn't kill them, but would keep them out of the picture. So that it could be developed into something you can use in a scenario, like if Americans were captured and held captive, hostage, you can go in there with an LSD weapon, spray it, which they never could get it work that way, but that was the idea. Everybody would be tripping out, including the captors. It wouldn't kill anybody. You rescue your people, you're going and that's the scenario. And they actually did develop something like that, but it turned out to be, it wasn't quite non-lethal. They developed another series, but LSD gave it the idea. They did a lot of work with LSD, the Army, and so did the CIA. So that was pretty much what they were. It's a sad chapter of psychedelics. But
Any thoughts or anything you'd like to share before we wrap this up for today?
this is my son Adrian, who
Anything you'd
just
like-
joined us.
any
Pull up a chair.
questions or-
Yeah, I was listening. I'm part of the library. There's a lot of new words, not words.
Mhm.
Cannabis, community, no space, that's not space. I don't know. I mean, I'm just like in the middle of smoking, once you roll it up and like light it, trying to depend on what strain it is, and kind of would be hot. I never indulged in my trips. So, I mean, I'm
That's all right.
actually spiritual, so I didn't lay it down bottom. It's me and that experience, and that was an escape out of the imagination. So anything I would take me further into my imagination, I would not want to do that without talking. So
That's wise.
great.
That's wise.
Yes.
Very wise. Welcome.
not just like bringing that into the community as well, like, I think it's like evolution of drugs, having, I suppose, like, without, like, a license, just, freely growing in the States, and then just legalizing it, putting, a tax on it, and then delivering it, kind of separates it from, the spiritual and physical uses of it. But what I see in my daily life is kind of like, I would love to eliminate all prescriptions and just replace that with more, holistic medicinal uses. So my parents, my mom, I recognize that, she had glaucoma, and they were like dumping pills to her. And I'm like, I know there's something I can look up in the kitchen that's on her that I can use, but those are those different stages of that healing process. I think that's what I'm looking for now.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I think that we're in that period of where we got to figure out where we put our trust, and I do think that medicine has its place,
Sure. It just shouldn't, it shouldn't preempt.
but I think it goes very much to the education should start with the children, because the children don't need anything. They already tripping, what I mean? And then we raise them to learn to, kind of condition them to but I do think it's a really exciting moment to be in these fields, and I think we do. I know for sure you have to show up with certain humility because you never know what you're saying could be somewhat offensive to indigenous cultures. We need people are raping that ayahuasca out of the ground, just raping it out of the ground, and there's no reparation. So to Martin's point, all these dudes, had all this plant medicine experience, right? Well, some of them were venture capitalists. Let's go raise a bunch of money and save the world. Really, for pretty much a certain halo over the last 24 months. It's not been that long. Like you say, it's pretty cute, but they're all doing the same ceremonial work, so they reinforcing. But talk the talk, walk the walk. So hard. It's very hard to build in reparation.
Yeah, that's a whole nother dimension.
The whole issue of what is the energetic and really civil responsibility we have to the cultures where these medicines are so sacred, right? We need to always remind ourselves of that.
Accountability. Also.
Yeah, that we have accountability, and when we do that, we start out with the accountability. Then the people of color, the people of different persuasions, the bipartisanship around that everybody had a grandma, had medicine, and then mommy took us to the doctor, the last 70 years, so I like to keep reminding myself and ourselves of we should be mindful of where these plants are sacred and, come from, so we'll appreciate that. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate that,
Two events that are going on. Ohio State University, it's the 12th to 14th, have a psychedelic event going on. They do
Oh,
Big conference. That looked good. Yeah, that looked really good.
That's awesome.
And if you go to MAP's website, also, $22 box that is fundamentals of psychedelics, and I think it's the first one that is put out, so that would be beneficial. It's really
Very good. Yes. Yeah. MAP's a great organization. Also very pioneering. Rick and all those guys, we go back with them, quite a while. And I know we're just at the beginning. So, welcome. All right. Cool.
Better the beginning than the end.
Well, I don't know. It's hot. The place burning down, but
Sure.
So in the history of humankind, have they ever just pulled out a certain cannabinoid and then blasted our endocannabinoid system with just one cannabinoid, like CBD or
No.
THC? So we really are so new to all of this. We have no idea what just pulling one cannabinoid out into the body.
Generally, cannabis are pretty safe, as a general rule. But I think when you're pulling one out, I don't think so much the issue is the danger, although for anyone who's had the misfortune of taking Marinol, pure pharmaceutical THC, as I have, it's a terrible experience. And I'm a stoner, so it's not like I don't like the THC high, but as an isolate, that the issue is really not that it's harmful or so much as it's just less effective when it comes right down to it. But it's easier to control, easier to measure. There's some advantages for working with isolates from a drug development perspective, you might say. Even though, as I pointed out, my son, who is a drug developer, has brought to my attention, the problem isn't just prohibition. It's that cannabinoids are just, they do so many things. CBD was documented in 2017, over 65 pathways. That's 5 years ago. It's probably over 100 now that they've discovered of CBD. It's this receptor, that one. It's an so.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I would like to say something about
Sure.
isolates. I kind of feel like as herbalists, you don't want to isolate.
Yeah.
From the plant. So this is a new thing. So as an herbalist, we've never really isolated active ingredients from the plants. We will plant medicine.
Yeah.
I know that supplement companies do it, but herbalists, we don't for the full plant.
And combine many herbs sometimes, few herbs, which is sort of their,
And so, but also having worked with medical patients for 10 years and also having a CBD store in Vermont for 5 or 6. You understand that people have to meet it where they need to meet it. And I've
Yeah.
never really wanted to judge people and say isolate is bad.
Yeah.
Because for some people, that's where they have to start.
Definitely.
You know, and if you have that conversation with them, because they're afraid of THC, or they can't have THC at all, or
Definitely.
they are.
Or you're Japan, they don't, allow THC, the world's really shut
Say the
down.
word in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, the world is shut down, so the isolate is not to be underestimated as an opener,
Or,
And it
or
works for
maybe
some
even more than that.
Even
And
if
it
it's just
does.
mentally. But they
Definitely.
just think it works.
No,
You know?
yes.
And then you
Sit
can
down, Bruce.
introduce more
Absolutely, absolutely,
That's the way.
absolutely. Yeah,
people.
absolutely.
It's bad.
Oh, yeah.
It depends on where it's coming
Yeah.
from. Somebody
Yeah.
says-
It doesn't even necessarily have to be an opener.
But in the cannabis in the recreational space, the two guys sitting next to each other, and one saying, "Well, how much THC is in your bud?" Oh, 28%. Oh, mine's 34%. That's the stoner market is really drives the dispensary business right now. And I think that we're really looking forward to trying to be a place that can the recreational should be for the medicinal purpose. It's the recreational meaning, let everybody get stoned.
Mhm.
And I think we're already in iPhone. We're in the next generation. New York, having been so delayed, the conversation in New York is much more. Of course, there'll be many places you're going to go and get stoned. Right now, you go to Washington Square Park, it's crazy. But can we use this opportunity to reacquaint people with the power of plants and having THC, having all of the ingredients with medicinal mushrooms, cross-fertilizing? That's something I think we could look forward to, and we need herbalists, we need the next generation of herbalists to be there with us, for sure.
I just want to ask everyone really quick, do you think it was the right decision for marijuana to be legalized in New York? Because I've been recently having discussions with other individuals who are distributors and not necessarily taxed by any means.
Black market.
Black market.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of these people, they're doing a service to others and they're trying to make a business out of it, and New York wants to collect taxes. And, with Proposition 219, for example, back in the day in California, it was like a wild, wild west in that biz and with medicinal and with medical marijuana in general. So what I'm getting at is, do you think like New York is going to be like a wild west now of, scratching this off the bill? Like, what should we do now? This isn't working. Do you know?
Actually, black market will be thriving.
In California, the black market is at least 3
Thriving.
times bigger than the legal market.
No, I think that, yeah, I think this is the whole thing, with cannabis particularly, we need a regulatory apparatus,
Yeah.
By the way, there's no gold rush in having a recreational license and making money. First of all, because of the federal laws, you can't write off expenses. You have all kind of workarounds. Then you have the liabilities, and then you got will there be enough? Is it any good? I don't know. I don't buy my Cabernet in New York. Do you? You get your Cabernet from California or Oregon. So I think that you gotta have a longer view. Like we're trying to have a longer view that I don't want to not be able to give you THC with CBD if it's better for your intention. Why should I be discriminated against as a business? But we don't necessarily need to be showing 30 different ways to flower in New York State, particularly, So but I get it. But when you're talking to the black market, they're getting more and more organized because of all the platforms, delivery services, and all kind of stuff. They don't have the threat of enforcement.
I think it's
It's
a
natural.
positive thing ultimately, but with a lot of wrinkles to because it's part of a setting already that's complex and unfair and rich and poor, and you're bringing a business that's underground overground, and it's a in some ways an unprecedented situation we're seeing with cannabis. But the situation beforehand was just so bad. The fact that he's throwing people in jail, or even if it's not jail, just the whole hassle around it.
Exactly.
Particularly poor people and people of color. People of color, you can't. That can't continue like that.
Yeah.
And legalization gives you an opening to move beyond it. At least if you're 21 and over. But okay, if you're 20 and 19, and you're living up, in a ghetto situation.
Well, that's
You're still going to be picked off and hassled, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And maybe it'll be much more difficult to justify that kind of thing, as it's clear that, at least California didn't slide into the ocean when it legalized, and it's just going to become normalized as it should be. That's important. But it becoming normalized doesn't mean that the economic situation will be favorable to really spreading the wealth. I think in New York, there's a sincere realization, sincere effort to try to bring an equity values, realities into the situation. The problem is they already started so off base and with a bad trajectory with the medical. You needed to be practically a billionaire to get one of those licenses. And we know, because some of those people who are vying for license would come out to California and literally study at our feet. How do you do this? How do you do it? And we could see the amount of money that they were expending on preparing their application.
Oh.
And the kind of, this one group, who was the head of security for them? Former Homeland Security chief in New York City. They were bringing into their cannabis. I mean, it's that level. It was crazy.
The whole cannabis legal movement is farcical, to be honest.
What was the word?
It's farcical. The cannabis lawyer movement, right? If you go to a lawyer, a cannabis lawyer, and you say, I want to retain you to help us get a license, you got to give them, $250,000, all at risk. There's no guarantee.
Yeah.
So, what's with that? So now that is very active. People are paying to put their money at risk, but they don't necessarily have the competitive advantages. And that's what New York is providing. They're providing a little more competitive advantage in terms of, you're the Alchemist kitchen. Oh, yes. Oh, you already have a license to sell hemp and CBD. Oh, you've been doing that for 5 years. Oh, you should apply. What's your revenue? Oh, how many employees? Oh, you should apply. So there is a, as opposed to come at it with big money and all kind of guns,
I think the regulators are sincere. I would like to believe so. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, at least initially, in New York.
Yeah.
But the problem is, when medical launched in New York, it was Cuomo. He's anti-cannabis, and they didn't. It was like, okay, anybody who's super rich, maybe, and can afford to not get to blow all this money, they're the only ones who could do it. So you already started. They're in place. The ones that made it through those hoops. There's no way you're ever going to level the playing field, really.
No.
Now you can try to boost and through equity and so forth. Yeah, but how can you compete against the Russian mob and Curaleaf? We've got literally billions. And if you're somebody who is in jail because of dealing cannabis way back when, or just possessing it, and now trying, it's so unlevel the playing field. Interestingly, when you look at states that have done it differently, and every state is sort of a mess in its own way, but of all states, Oklahoma, a red state, they made the bar so low that it took away the advantage of the ultra rich, because anyone can get a license. You pay a little bit of money and you got a license, and now it's flourishing.
What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Well,
you have
we have guys calling us up from Oklahoma City saying, hey, my partner went to the Alchemist kitchen. How'd you like to operate out here? We have a THC license. We don't know what to do with it, You know,
You have more cannabis stores in Oklahoma City. than you
Yeah,
do in
no,
Los
but they
Angeles,
say, you know, like, you know, we need a different genre or something, you know, come on out here. I say, yeah.
See,
buddy,
ultimately, the
run out
problem
there,
is we
you know.
live in a society that's
Yeah.
very unequal.
It's so,
And you're trying to deal with that reality while you're also trying to spread the wealth a little bit and give communities that have been for the brunt of the drug war an opportunity.
Yeah.
But you're starting in this way that's way
so
whacked,
crazy.
you know. But if they imagine if they didn't, you didn't need literally $5 million to apply for a license in California. I mean, New York for a medical license. That's what they were spending in terms of who's got that kind of money, and they could afford not to get a license. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Who can do that?
No.
Maybe this many people.
Yeah.
It's much better to keep the bar low. I hate to say it, you know, in some ways, the Republican idea is a little bit better. You know,
I'm so glad.
not in terms of equity or race, you know, but in terms of just keeping the regulations.
Totally.
New Mexico, they've done it pretty well. My cousins is involved in the business now. Again, keeping it very low, the bar, not allowing the MSOs, the multi-state operators in.
Yeah.
Although they allow some people from out of state, but not the big operators.
Yeah.
Okay, get it going, see what happens.
See what happens.
Much better way to start than the crazy situation that California is in and that New York
Definitely.
is somewhat different, but still,
Definitely.
that's a big problem.
We'll see. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you.